Hello everyone, this is Stephen Bassi. I'm with the Boson NetSim team. In this video I want to do a walkthrough of Standalone Labs number 6, the Cisco Discovery Protocol. The objective of this lab is to learn how the Cisco Discovery Protocol, or CDP, how it functions and what's required for Cisco devices to be discovered. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The first part of this lab is actually loading the lab. We have the NetSim interface up, and we have the home screen on the right side and we have the lab tree on the left side. To launch the lab, you just need to double click on the lab title in the lab tree. So here's Lab 6 Cisco Discovery Protocol. I'll go ahead and double click on that. This is going to launch the netmap and any initial configurations that are required by the lab. I'm going to go ahead and click on the net map here so we can take a look at our topology. I'm going to minimize the console for right now. So as you can see, we have three routers set up: router 1, router 2, router 3. The routers are connected via serial interfaces. And looking at the status bar here at the bottom of the screen, you can see that the lab has completed loading. Now if you're following along in your lab document, you'll notice that task 1 is simply loading this initial configuration, which we've just completed. So let's go ahead and move on to task 2. Task 2 requires us to enable the router interfaces. The first three steps of task 2 are simply enabling, simply setting the host names of each of the routers. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the consoles here, and I'm going to hide the net map. We don't need that for now. So for step 1, let's configure the host name on router 1. As you can see from the drop down list, you can select either router 1, router 2, or router 3. We have router 1 selected right now. The first thing I need to do is type the enable command. That will bring us into privileged mode, and then type configure terminal, or config t, to bring us into global configuration mode. So I'll type the host name now. And the host name now is set to router 1. So I'm going to repeat that on router 2 and router 3. Okay, so now we have all of the host names set on each of the devices, and we can move on to step 4. Step 4 in the lab document asks us to configure an IP address and enable the serial 000 interface on router 1. By default on router 1, router 2, and router 3, all of the interfaces are disabled. So let's go ahead and navigate into serial 000. Use the interface command to do that. The document asks us to set an IP address of 10.1.1.1 with a subnet mask /24 or 255.255.255.0. And since all of these interfaces are currently disabled, we'll have to execute the no shut command to bring the interface up. So that brings serial 000 interface into an up state. And we're going to want to move on to router 2. And on router 2, we have two serial interfaces to configure. That's serial 000 and serial 001. So let's move into serial 000 first. And the document asks us to configure an IP address of 10.1.1.2. And we're going to use the same subnet mask that we did on router 1. But before we execute the no shutdown command, we have to configure a clock rate on this interface. The reason being is that router 2, each of the serial interfaces are configured as the DCE end of the connection. So let's set a clock rate of 1000 kilobit per second. Now, if you're not sure which end of a serial connection is the DCE end, you can use the show controllers command to find that out. In this case, our document tells us, so we'll skip that step. Okay, now that I've configured the clock rate on serial 000, I can go ahead and execute the no-shut command. So this should bring up the link between router 2 and router 1. Okay, now I'm going to navigate into interface serial 001 on router 2 and configure the IP address. The document asks us to configure an IP address of 172.16.10.2 with a /24 subnet mask. Again, we have to set the clock rate. And now we can execute the no-shut command. So let's move on to router 3 to configure our IP address configuration. On router 3, we're going to configure the serial 000 interface. And we're going to use an IP address of 172.16.10.1 with a /24 subnet mask. Now this is the DTE end of the connection, so we won't need to set a clock rate. So that concludes task 2, which was simply configuring IP addresses and host names on each of the devices. Task 3, now we're going to get into actually using the Cisco Discovery Protocol. We'll start with a quick review of what CDP is. CDP allows for devices to share basic configuration information, and it operates without any IP addresses or protocol-specific information being configured. CDP is enabled by default on all interfaces, and since it is a data link protocol, any CDP information that is announced by each device, CDP packets are not routed, and they will only travel to directly connected devices. So now that we have all the devices configured and we have connections up and running between the devices, let's jump to router 2, and in step 1 of task 3, we're going to use the show CDP interface command to view the status of all interfaces that are running CDP. So this is a privilege mode command. Exit. Show CDP interface. So what you can see here is each interface that is running CDP will have some information displayed. This includes the hold time as well as how frequently the interface is sending packets. For the interfaces that are up, which are serial 000 and serial 001, we can see that we're sending packets every 60 seconds, which is the default, and our hold time is set to 180 seconds, which is also the default. It's important to know the hold time because that tells us how long we're going to hold on to CDP information that we receive from devices on the other end of that connection. So for example, if the device on the other end of serial 000 were to go down for some reason, we would still hold on to the CDP information that we learned on that interface for 180 seconds. After 180 seconds, that CDP information would be discarded. The next command we want to use is the show Cdp Neighbors command, and this is going to show us some information about our directly connected neighbors. So on router 2, if you type show Cdp Neighbors from privilege mode, you can see that we've collected information about the devices connected to interfaces serial 000 and serial 001. So we've learned the device IDs, which are router 1 and router 3, the host names that we configured earlier. We've also learned the platform of the devices that we're connected to. We've learned the ports that we're connected to, the remote ports. And we understand the capabilities of the device that we're connected to. In this case, we know that we're connected to a router. The hold time value that we see here is the time remaining before we discard the information that we've learned from these devices. Hopefully these other devices are configured to send out a CDP announcement more frequently than the configured hold time that we have. So in this case, if we don't receive another CDP announcement within 169 seconds from either of these devices, we'll discard that information from our table. The next command we want to use is the show Cdp Neighbors detail command. This is going to give us some more detailed information about the devices that we're directly connected to. So you can see, in addition to the device ID and platform and hold time, we were getting some additional information, including a configured IP address on the device, as well as additional information about the platform and additional information about the version of the operating system that the device is using. So we can scroll down and we can see that we've received that information for router 1 and router 3. Moving on to the next command, we'll use the show Cdp entry command, and we're going to have to specify a device name for this command. So we'll use router 1. So we want to show details of only router 1, and as you can see, no details about router 3 are displayed when we use this command. Now there are some configuration options available when you're using CDP. To validate what your current configuration is for CDP, you can use the show CDP command. So this will show you simply how often you're sending out CDP packets, what your configured hold time is, and what version of CDP you're using. You can configure the CDP packet announcement frequency by using the CDP timer command. By default, as we can see here, we have CDP packets being sent out every 60 seconds, but if you want to change that, just go into global configuration mode and use the CDP timer command. I'm going to use the help option here so you can see what range you're given. You're able to configure anywhere between 5 and 254 seconds. In this case, we'll select a time of 45 seconds. Likewise, if you want to change the hold time value, you can do that by using the CDP hold time command. I'm also going to use the help command here to see what range you're able to select, and you can select anywhere between 10 seconds and 255 seconds. By default, it is configured to 180 seconds. We'll drop that down to 60 seconds. Now to validate these changes, just use the show CDP command again. And you can see we have sending CDP packets out every 45 seconds now, and we're sending a hold time value of 60 seconds. Let's move on to some commands that will allow you to enable and disable CDP on your device. For security reasons, if there are no directly connected Cisco devices on the network, you may want to disable CDP for a specific interface. To do so, you can use the no CDP enable command. In this case, we're going to jump to router 2 serial interface 001, and we'll type no CDP enable, and this is going to disable CDP announcements from being sent out of this interface, so CDP will no longer be running on this interface. Now that I've disabled CDP on serial 001, we're going to wait a few minutes and see if on router 3 we're no longer receiving the CDP information from router 2. So let's go ahead and give it some time for the network to converge, and we'll go ahead and take a look at router 3 to see if that's actually occurred. Okay, we've given it a couple minutes now. We'll go ahead and jump over to router 3 to see that if CDP information is still being received from router 2. So on router 3, let's type show Cdp Neighbors. And as you can see, we have no information in our CDP table. Normally we would see router 2 here if router 2 was sending out CDP announcements. Another way to validate that router 2 is not sending out any CDP information is to use the show CDP interface command on router 2. So let's jump back to router 2, go into privilege mode, and use show CDP interface. And we can see that serial 000 is still there. Some of the other fast Ethernet interfaces which are down are still listed, but we don't see serial 001. So that means that serial 001 is not sending out CDP information. So let's enable CDP on serial 001 once again, and see if on router 3 we once again start receiving those updates. So I'll go into interface configuration mode for serial 001 and type Cdp enable, and that should re-enable Cdp so that it's being sent out of that interface from router 2. So on router 3, let's type show Cdp Neighbors, and you can see that router 2's information has shown up once again. And that concludes the walkthrough of standalone lab number 6 on the Cisco Discovery Protocol. I hope you found it helpful, and we'll see you next time.